If you're a car lover, then you are well served when it comes to movie representation. Whether it's the tricked out gadgetiness of James Bond cars, the simple rawness of Bullitt, or the over-the-top schlock of Fast and Furious, there are literally hundreds of cool movie cars and car chasers. But when it comes to bikes, there's not so much on offer. The whole bad boy biker image has been done badly so many times it's embarrassing. And so, I'm going to count down the top 20 movie motorbikes. Well, sort of. It's not really in any particular order, so it's not so much a counting down as just a counting. So, let's do that then. More of a documentary than a movie per se, but Close to the Edge was still made for cinemas and was even released in 3D. It follows the build-up to the 2010 Isle of Man TT, giving an insight into the history of the race and what makes it so special. While it features some of the big names in road racing, it's Guy Martin who is the star of the film, and effectively the launch of his presenting career. Close to the Edge is the pinnacle of Isle of Man TT documentaries. If you have any interest in fast bikes, you need to watch this. It goes far beyond just showing bikes going fast. It delves deep into the psychology of those who risk their lives for the thrill. Many of you watching this video may never have heard of the Doom franchise. That's Doom with an H, not Doom based on the video game series. Mainly because it's a series of Bollywood movies, but an extremely successful one. While Hollywood tried to shove movies like Torque and Biker Boys down our throats, all to no avail, Bollywood managed to get it right. While the American films tried to take themselves too seriously, despite also having a lot of ridiculousness such as dueling sports bikes, Doom is just good old-fashioned cheesy fun. Yes, there's crazy physics, yes, the expensive bikes get swapped out for cheap 125s during the stunts, yes, the sequels feature bikes riding on tight ropes and riding up bridges before transforming into jet skis, but it's Bollywood, and it's brilliant. And not only that, it's culturally significant too, as it made sports bikes in South Asia cool again, in a period where nobody really paid much attention to them. Sales and imports increased massively, and now even European and Japanese smaller engine sports bikes are being made in India too. Is it directly connected to Doom? Well, who knows, but the point is Doom has had an enormous impact on the biking scene in India, and over here, well, it's just a good time all round. It's obvious that Tom Cruise is a big bike lover, and there's definitely more than one example of this in the Mission Impossible franchise. While the action sequences are arguably better in Mission Impossible 5 or Rogue Nation, the only annoying thing is that there's clearly been some deal made with BMW, so all the vehicles are made by the same company. There's even some cringeworthy moments where you can tell they had to write in BMW's crash detection system into the script. Still, it's a fantastic chase scene, and the fact that Tom Cruise is doing most of his own stunts with very little protection only adds to the tension. If you can't see past the product placement though, then Mission Impossible 2 is the one for you. After taking out a couple of bad guys on Triumphs, Ethan Hunt makes his escape in a scene filled with stunts that actually wouldn't look too out of place in a Doom film, come to think of it. While most of us are in agreement that the original Matrix movie is by far and away the best that the franchise ever produced, and then there's a rather big drop-off, one thing is for sure, and that is that the second instalment, The Matrix Reloaded, is worth watching if only for the amazing highway chase. In what is already a great scene, Trinity and the Keymaker find themselves on a Ducati transporter and help themselves to a dark green 996. With fast sweeping shots and CGI that still looks good 20 years later, you can fast forward to the good bit and enjoy 15 minutes of sci-fi vehicle chase perfection. Probably the most iconic motorcycle scene in any movie ever. While attempting to escape a Nazi prisoner of war camp, Steve McQueen's character disguises himself and steals a bike, culminating in that jump. The thing is though, it's a tiny part of the movie, and he doesn't even manage to escape. Even so, it's become one of those classic moments of cinema and worthy of a place on this list. Night and Day is a light-hearted action movie that involves Cameron Diaz's character getting accidentally pulled into the wild world of a secret agent's mission. While there's a lot of comedy in this movie, the action is undeniably well done, and the standout chase scene is a crazy mix of smart roadsters and a Ducati, all during the running of the bulls. And yes, the bulls do become part of the chase too. The John Wick series is a masterclass in action sequences, particularly fight scenes, and seeing as Keanu Reeves is a massive bike fan and the entirety of Chapter 3 requires him to be on the run, it was about time that we got to see what a proper bike chase scene would look like in the John Wick universe, and it doesn't disappoint. With a $14 million bounty on his head, Wick escapes on another hitman's bike, only to be pursued by a bunch of katana-wielding killers. It may only be a small section in a movie filled with amazing fight scenes, but it's arguably one of the best bike chases ever filmed, and there's no way I can do it any justice. You'll just have to go see it. I'll admit, Top Gun is not a movie about motorbikes in any way, shape or form, but Tom Cruise's Kawasaki GPZ 900R became a big part of establishing Maverick's character, so much so that when it came to do a sequel 36 years later, what was Maverick riding? Yep, his old Kawasaki. With two iconic appearances in two great movies, there's no argument that this bike deserves to be on the list. James Bond has actually been known to include a few bikes into his chase scenes, but when the franchise was rebooted with Daniel Craig, the action sequences were taken up a few notches. One good example of this is the bike chase over the rooftops of Istanbul at the start of Skyfall. And while we know it's not actually Daniel Craig doing the actual riding, despite some clever face swap technology, much of the riding is real. When we see bikes flying over rooftops, they're really doing that. It's a great scene, but arguably could have been a bit longer. Then again, it's not like there was any big build-up to it. It's the opening scene of the movie. The second Bond movie on this list is probably the most underrated in the franchise, and that is Tomorrow Never Dies. In a scene where Bond is handcuffed to his female counterpart, there's a really smartly written bike chase on a BMW 1200C, and that's after a really well-written car chase with his BMW 7 Series. No prizes for guessing whether BMW had a hand in sponsoring this movie too. If you need any more convincing, the bad guys drive Mercedes. While Batman is better known for his Batmobile, halfway through The Dark Knight, the Tumbler is taken out of commission and Batsy pursues the Joker on the Batpod. The chase even takes a page out of Bullett's book by having no music playing throughout. But it's not just in this movie, the Batpod returns in The Dark Knight Rises, this time with Catwoman causing the destruction, even taking out Bane. While it may not be the most realistic depiction of a motorcycle in a movie, what did you expect from a Batman film? The World's Fastest Indian is not only one of the best motorcycle-themed movies of all time, it's also one of the most charming. Based on the true story of New Zealander Burt Munro and his dream of riding his shed-built Indian flat out at the Bonneville Salt Flats before he kicks the bucket, Anthony Hopkins is absolutely fantastic, even if the Kiwis didn't really like his accent. While the movie takes some liberties and compresses the real story down a bit, it's still fantastic and one for everyone, regardless of whether you're into bikes or not. Terminator 2 is often touted as one of the best sequels of all time, and it also happens to contain one of the best bike chases of all time too. Fleeing from the T-1000 in a truck, John Connor escapes on a dirt bike. Just as he's about to be crushed, the Schwarzenegger Terminator rides in to save the day, and everything ends in a massive explosion. The only thing that dampens things a bit is, if you watch it in high definition these days, the switch to stunt doubles or even a dummy is pretty obvious. Still, a staple 90s action movie. Easy Rider initially comes off as a shallow, rebellious ode to anti-establishment, but you soon realise it's a tragic, reflective look at whether life can really work out the way that we dream it to be. The dream of cutting loose, throwing away your watch and any other trivial worry and just hitting the road and taking life as it comes has long been attractive, but there's always been a question of whether it can really be what we think it is. As a product of the 60s, it preaches the hippie lifestyle of peace and love, but at the same time shows the reality of prejudice and human hypocrisy. The main characters are not two guys living off simple pleasures of life. They're businessmen that make a big score off a drug deal and try to build a new life. Free love is great and all, but then you can always head down to a brothel in New Orleans if you've got the cash to pay for it. While you can read into the storyline in a number of ways, what made this film a classic is really the beautiful sweeping shots of the American heartland, all to a great soundtrack. The Motorcycle Diaries is based on a memoir written by Che Guevara. It chronicles a journey across the Andes, through Chile, the desert, the Amazon, and through to Venezuela, and eventually reaching a Peruvian leper colony. The trip is considered to be one of the major contributors to Guevara's journey to becoming a Marxist revolutionary. But for the bike lovers, there's just some nice shots of an old classic bike. Tron is like nothing else. A game developer is transported inside the world of a mainframe computer, full of characters that are meant to represent pieces of software, in what turns out to be kind of a cross between The Hunger Games and Wreck-It Ralph. The captured programs are forced to play a series of games, including Light Cycle. By today's standards, Marlon Brando's Johnny doesn't actually look that wild. In fact, if you hadn't seen the film, only some of the poster shots, you'd be forgiven for thinking he seems like he may even be a gay icon. But no, in the 1950s, the donning of a black leather jacket and pseudo-military-esque clothes while riding around on motorbikes justifiably scared many an upstanding citizen due to its connotations of the German SS officers that were in full force less than a decade earlier. There's not a whole lot to say about the Wild One. It's basically one unlikable biker gang feuding with another, causing chaos in a small town. It's not so much about the story though, it's about the style, something that found itself being a big influence on biking subcultures, but also influencing movies like Elvis Presley's Roustabout and even Grease 2, which for the record is miles better than the first Grease. Quadrophenia is loosely based on the Brighton Beach riots of the 1960s between the leather-clad rockers, based heavily on Marlon Brando's look from The Wild One, and the suit-wearing, scooter-riding mods. Don't expect much action, this is more of a coming-of-age story wrapped around a cultural moment in time. While much of the conflict was hyped up for the sake of the media, Quadrophenia's style is the biggest thing that carries through to today. Without going into a long debate about what your favourite Indiana Jones movie is, we will say that there's no beating the short motorcycle escape in The Last Crusade. I mean, Indy jousts a Nazi with a flagpole with Sean Connery in a sidecar. What more could you want? Akira takes place in a dystopian version of Neo Tokyo in 2019. And while it's animated, it's definitely not for kids. What starts off as a movie about rival bike gangs soon turns into a completely mind-boggling apocalyptic sci-fi drama that I'm still not sure I actually understand. It may not be to everyone's taste, but the animation is seriously impressive. Just don't expect an easy ride, if you pardon the pun. Well, that's our 20. But there's still time for some honourable mentions. I admit it's bending the rules slightly, as The Long Way Round is a TV show and not a movie, but honestly, a list like this couldn't exist without mentioning it. The documentary series that follows Ewan McGregor and Charlie Boorman as they attempt to ride around the world, The Long Way Round, is essential viewing for anyone even slightly interested in motorbikes. and I fully recommend watching the extended version on DVD, not the cut down version from TV, as the extra content is well worth it, and you'll probably find yourself binging it in one session. The follow-up, Long Way Down, was also good, and the Apple TV exclusive Long Way Up was slow but certainly worth watching too. But nothing beats the original. Okay, let's get one thing clear. Torque is not a good movie. It's a ridiculous mix of Fast and Furious and early 2000s video game cutscenes. In fact, seeing as it had the same producer, they really wanted you to think that this was the bike equivalent of Fast and Furious, even going so far as including this line.
I live my life a quarter mile at a time.
I live my life a quarter mile at a time.
That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Which doesn't even make sense in the context of this story because it's not about street racing. But anyway, it still has dumb fun moments like the little cars suck Easter egg in the opening scene. And don't expect much, but it's watchable. I know I can already hear the groaning, but I don't care what you think. I liked Wild Hogs. It's a fun family comedy. However, easily the best scene of the movie is actually a post-credit scene where the Del Fuego's blown-up bar is rebuilt as part of an episode of Extreme Makeover Home Edition. Say what you will, I like it. There are a few too many gay jokes in it though. Actually, way too many. Watching Lara Croft Tomb Raider now, it's very early 2000s action. But even though it's based on a Lads Mag fodder video game star, this was actually quite important for establishing females in lead action roles. And the gunfight in the Croft Manor involving a bike was screen grabbed constantly as a promo image. In a world where I can't do the voice. In a world where artificial intelligence has gone rogue and automated cars can no longer be trusted, it's up to robo-skeptic Detective Spooner to take them down in his vintage Converse on the back of his, I suppose also vintage, MV Augusta F4. While it doesn't have that big a role in the film, the fact that all the AI-infected cars of the world are shut down, Spoon's bike is presented as the last bastion of freedom. Unfortunately, he crashes it pretty quickly, but at least it takes out a few of the robots with it. Early comic book movies were often hit or miss. It was usually the darker ones that worked better, and Wesley Snipes' portrayal of Blade was just that. And seeing as it was a success, that only means one thing: sequels. While Blade Trinity wasn't exactly the best, Blade 2 was kind of the same as the first movie, but more. And while it may have been short and sweet, the small sequence with matching Ducatis was a great way of establishing Blade's no-nonsense approach. Not so much for the action, more for the improvised interrogation technique. And that's it for our list. If you know any more, drop them down in the comments section below, and I will see you all next time.